Good morning! This is Bill from Curious Cars, and today from Autohaus of Naples on, well, you know, it's not really a bad Florida Thursday morning. I have to say, it could be a lot worse. We've been blessed with a little bit of good weather. I'm not going to be one of those guys who cries about the heat in July, which of course is soul-sucking and absolutely life-destroying. And then when you get a little bit of cool weather, you know, you put on a jacket and oh my God, it's chilly. Well, no, it's not. But, you know, damn it, it's nice. The weather, it's probably in the high 60s. The humidity is fairly low. Oh God, it's the time of year that I actually start to enjoy living in Naples a little bit, and that's a good thing, so I'm not going to bitch about it. I've heard rumors that we're supposed to have a cold winter, something about one of those Spanish kids, Nino or Nina or something. I'm not taking that to the bank yet, but I do have high hopes. We'll see. You know, chances are I'll be disappointed, because frankly, I'm always friggin' disappointed in every facet of my life. But I do have some hope for this one, and we'll see how it goes. And with that said, we're going to jump right into that. I know I haven't done a video in a while. I apologize for that. A little bit of a mix. I've got some cars that I've been running on Bring a Trailer for People. That's been occupying my time. The Vipers in the comment section are absolutely torturous. But otherwise, I just, you know, there haven't been that many cars that I've been interested in doing, and finally this one popped along at Autohaus, and I said, all right, let's jump on it, let's do it. I got to get something out. So here we are, and it is a 1965 Shelby Cobra Mark III. Well, okay, it isn't. In truth, like virtually every Cobra you're ever going to see driving around the streets, it's a recreation, it's a kit, a replica. It's an homage to the original, and also a way to, of course, capitalize on an automotive icon. Other than the Myers-Manx, it's probably the most replicated car in automotive history, followed, you know, pretty closely by the Porsche 356 Speedster, but you're going to see these things driving around, and let me tell you, if you see one filling up at a gas station, you walk up to the guy because you want to look at it. Don't ask him if it's a real one. It's not. I mean, the chances of it being a real one are about 1 in 12 billion. So, you know, what you're looking at is going to be a kit. It's going to be very different in terms of some things than the originals, but it's going to be, well, we'll get into why it's going to be a pretty cool thing. And to get into the roots of that, we have to go back. We have to go far back. And it all started with a guy named Carroll Shelby, a name that's come up many times in these reviews. And, you know, finally I'm doing a car that, you know, actually he would have despised this car, because I very much doubt he liked the kits. I'm sure there were lawsuits going on, as there were with Myers-Manx. But anyway, this is the car the man is absolutely famous for. And he was an automotive legend that even most non-car people have heard of. I mean, you ask your wife and girlfriend about a Bizzarini or, you know, a Mangusto, they're not going to really have a clue. But you ask them about a Cobra or Carroll Shelby, there's a strong chance they'll have heard of him. And there's a good reason for that. He was born in 1923 in Leesburg, Texas. He was the son of a postal worker, and apparently he was just absolutely infatuated with cars from a very young age. It was just something that he was born into genetically. And by the time he was 15, he was driving and maintaining his dad's two-door Ford. It's just, you know, a guy who absolutely loved cars. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps immediately after graduating from high school in 1942, and apparently showed tremendous aptitude for being a pilot. Supposedly they kept the best pilots to be trainers, you know, for all the other pilots coming up, and that's what they did with Shelby. So he actually never saw combat. Apparently he requested it, who knows, but he ended up stateside training other pilots and focused in on bombers, which is where they put him. And he flew everything from like the B-17 to the B-29 Super Fortress. But apparently his favorite was the B-26 Marauder, because it was the It was the fastest. It was even faster than some fighter planes, in a straight line with both engines cooking. And that name Marauder reminds me of my friend Al. He has an RV that he bought a couple of years ago called the Intruder. And I mean, I pull into his house sometimes and I see that thing sitting there and I think, who the hell named this thing? I mean, under what possible circumstance is an intruder a good thing? Who the hell wants an intruder anywhere? And there it is, plastered on the side of Al's RV. But yeah, anyway, I digress. The desire for speed, in that B-26, is what would become kind of a very real thing for Mr. Shelby. After the war ended, he had a brief stint that was apparently very unrewarding, where he tried to be a chicken farmer. That just didn't work out at all. And from that, he decided to get into driving race cars. And with that, he found pretty immediate success. He won his first race in 1952 in an MGTC, a real British roadster of the time, and was soon driving the world's fastest and most expensive race cars at tracks around the world, from Riverside in California to Spa-Francorchamps. Everywhere that this sort of international racing took place, you'd find Shelby. He was not Amerocentric or Eurocentric. And his success peaked when he won the 24-hour race at Le Mans in 1959, driving an Aston Martin. Not the first American to do so, I believe. Phil Hill, an American, won in 1958 at Le Mans in a Ferrari, and I believe he was the first American driver. But I think over the years there have been 10, no more than that, who have won Le Mans, American guys, and of course Shelby was one of them, and one of the very early ones. But that success came to a screeching halt a year later in 1960 when, and if you watch that Ford versus Ferrari movie, you can get a feel for that. His heart condition apparently put an end to his racing. His doctor said, look, man, you get out in that thing again, you're going to die. I mean, there's just no question about it. He was popping nitroglycerin tablets before every race, and his heart just didn't... I think they once put a heart meter on Formula One. They probably have them all now all the time, but I remember there was something about Senna. This is probably back in the 80s. Ayrton Senna, who of course died later, and his heartbeat at the start of one of the Grand Prix was like 160 or so. I mean, it's obviously very tough on the ticker to be a race car driver, so it didn't work out for Shelby. He had to quit, and he's obviously got some money, he's got some time, he's well connected in the car world, and sort of tried to figure out what the hell to do with himself. And he'd always wanted to be a car constructor, but whipping up a competitive car from scratch takes an awful lot of resources, money, facilities, people, things that he just didn't have the access to. He just didn't have enough for all that. But then he heard about a British car company called AC, and they were about to kill their Ace Roadster model because they lost their engine supplier. They, like all British cars at the time, they were kind of beautiful, well-balanced, handled well, but they had sort of anemic engines. And apparently this Ace used a Bristol engine, which was a BMW inline six design pre-war, and they were going to lose the supplier of that. They didn't have anything else figured out, so they were just going to dump the car. Well, Shelby heard about that. He pounced on the opportunity, flew to England to present a proposal to the people at AC, and that proposal would ultimately change automotive history and result in, the car that we see here right now in the viewfinder. Europe and America were both car crazy in the 1960s. It was this sort of a booming and optimistic time, fast-paced technological advancements, the space race, the Cold War. Every time you turned around, something new and exciting was happening. But while Europe focused on handling, balance, finesse, and kind of hyper-complicated engines, America zeroed in on raw power, torquey V8s, and straight-line performance, just raw, brute speed. And there was always this sort of hanging desire to combine the two, and that's really where Shelby was motivated. And that's what he pitched to AC. He wanted them to build the Ace to accommodate a V8 engine and then ship it to his facility in California for completion, and then they'd sell it around the world. And AC kind of immediately saw the beauty of that plan, and to their credit, and relished the idea of building something to compete with the newly released Jaguar E-Type that was kind of taking the world by storm. They would get this V8 high-performance roadster that would really take it to Jaguar. So they liked it, and they agreed to send Shelby a modified prototype. They modified the frame and steering assemblies and suspension to accommodate a V8, and then they shipped it over to Shelby to be a prototype for development. And while they were doing that, Shelby went to GM to see if they wanted to supply the engine. I guess he really liked their new small block or their ongoing small block, but they didn't. They had just spent years and a shocking amount of money developing the Corvette from kind of a an all-show, no-go type thing into a true sports car that could actually race. Spent a lot of time and money and personnel hours on it, and they didn't see any point in immediately creating competition for it, right off the bat. So Ford did. They had the Thunderbird to compete with the Corvette, but they turned that into a personal luxury car and really didn't have a Corvette competitor. So Shelby comes along and says, look, we're going to turn this little AC Ace into a, Corvette killer. You have any interest? And they absolutely did, and they agreed to supply their new small block Windsor engines. They were 260 at the time, V8, that had the right footprint to fit under the hood of one of these small British roadsters while still putting out some pretty good horsepower. And you have to, it sort of just all came together. So when the first body arrived from England, it went to a guy named Dean Moon, a legendary hot rodder. You've probably seen the decals on race cars that say Moon with the two eyes in them. And that guy was just an absolute hot rodding legend. So the first Cobra went to his shop in California. They brought the V8s over, and within 8 hours, the thing was installed, running, and driving because AC had really taken it seriously and done a hell of a good job. They made a couple of prototype changes, like originally the AC car had the complete rear end from a Jaguar E-Type with the inboard brakes. Shelby decided to change that because it would be cheaper and better cooling to go to outboard brakes. And then they moved the gas tank filler from the fender to the center of the hood or the center of the trunk. And that was about it. So a couple little changes. The next AC that came over would be production car number 1. And that actually went to New York to be completed by Shelby partner. But basically, they became the Mark I Cobras, and they proved to be a hit on the streets, like, instantly, even though they were shockingly expensive. I think, of course, because they were friggin' beautiful. I mean, what an incredible piece to look at. And, the V8 power to boot. Any guy with money who was looking at a Corvette or a Jaguar E-Type, could look at this thing and say, man, I can, beat both of them and, drive around in this package. And it worked out really well. But not just on the streets or even at the Ford dealerships where they sold really well for as few as there were. I mean, we're not talking about a big production vehicle here. But they instantly proved themselves at the racetrack. I mean, they were eating the Corvette's lunch right out of the box and even giving Ferrari a run for its money. And, you couldn't help but notice that. Shelby noticed that. He knew that this style car wouldn't really work at the top tiers of racing because of its lack of aerodynamics. So, not happy with the success, he went to a guy named Peter Brock, kind of a legendary designer, and had him take the underpinnings from the Mark II Cobra and build a car around it that would be an aerodynamic, high-speed track car. And that was called the Shelby Daytona Coupe. I think they made like 6 or 7 of them. And that thing was incredible. instantly successful at the racetrack with its aerodynamic body. And in '65, it won the FIA's World Manufacturer GT Championship and was the only American-made car to ever do so before or since. So you're talking about a pretty good deal. I mean, it's just amazing to me that this, kind of cowboy hat wearing bullshit and Texas chicken farmer guy, not only is a tremendous people pleaser and bullshitter, but he actually delivers. The cars that he builds deliver. They do what they're supposed to do. And I think that's what makes Carroll Shelby such a legend. But anyway, by this time, the Cobras, like this one, had become the Mark IIs. They now had the 289 engine. Actually, the tail end of the Mark Is had that. The 260 was enlarged to the 289. And the rack and pinion steering, they had a worm gear steering before. Then the MGB ended up with rack and pinion, which AC borrowed. And they also borrowed the steering column from a VW Beetle to use it. And that was the Mark II Cobra. But one final Cobra was to come, which is the one that this car is modeled after. And that's the Mark III. And of course, that's at the peak of the muscle car insanity. The Cobra is already a legend. Shelby is never satisfied with what's under the hood. So they take this Cobra, they get rid of the 289, and they put a 427 side oiler V8 in it. Ford, of course. Basically the same engine that was in that GT40, again, in the Ford versus Ferrari. If you haven't seen that, you should see it. But a true racing engine, designed for, the high end. They shoehorn it into this thing. It's got the footprint and the weight of a Miata, and now it's got, close to 500 horsepower under the hood. And it just became the automotive equivalent of strapping yourself to a Sidewinder missile. Absolutely insane. They went from a transverse leaf spring to coil spring suspension in the front, in the back. They made it handle as best they could. They had aluminum heads and such on the 427 to sort of help it be lighter. But man, you're talking about a big, heavy V8 under the hood of this thing. And even though it worked by sheer power alone, it's pretty well known that the small block Cobras, the 289s, are a much more balanced driver package. And there's some story of Shelby. He was friends with Bill Cosby, I guess, before all the scandals hit. And Cosby was sort of this elegant guy at the time, who liked driving European sports cars. Shelby built two cars called the Super Snake, and they had this 427 with two Paxton superchargers on it, putting out about 800 horsepower. He put an automatic in one of them and drove it over to Bill Cosby's house and said, look, this is the Cobra to end all Cobras. You got to own this thing. It's going to be more fun than your Ferrari. Apparently, Cosby jumped in it, put it in drive, drove it around the block, came back in, and said, yeah, this is the Cobra to end all Cobra drivers. Go ahead and take it back. I'm going to keep it, my Ferrari. And then they ended up selling it to someone else, some poor cat who apparently lost it big time on the Pacific Coast Highway, went over a cliff and into the Pacific Ocean, and probably would have been one of the most collectible cars in world history ended up, drifted away into the guy died, and none of it was ever to be seen again. So kind of a sad story, but truly just an amazing thing. And the car was an absolute monster, just an absolute monster. But after, Ford then sort of took over production of Shelby American in the late 60s. They toned down Shelby's direct involvement. Going into the early 70s, he just wasn't having the fun that he was having before, and he retired. For 9 years, he ended up touring Africa. I don't know what he was doing over there, maybe shooting rhinos. They did that at the time. But he was enjoying himself and retired to his ranch in Texas and ended up, entering all these chili cook-offs. Apparently he loved chili and ended up making a little chili company in his spare time. You can actually find it in your grocery store chili mix shelf, Carroll Shelby's chili, and people seem to like that as well. You could have it with beans or without. But then he went back into, he got into a partnership with Chrysler in the 80s and early 90s, and then he tried building another variant of the Cobra, and there was a big scandal where apparently he found some old Cobra chassis and, was going to make some new Cobras on them with the true CSX serial number. Then it turned out he had, had them fabricated and aged somewhere, and it became kind of a thing, but that went away. Then in the early 2000s, he went back with Ford and started putting his name on their Mustangs and even a truck and some other stuff until he passed away in 2012. But, look, good, bad, and ugly, without question, he is one of the most amazing people in automotive history, and one of the great, the guy had basically the brains, the resourcefulness, and the showmanship of a P.T. Barnum. He was larger than life, an absolute legend, and you can't take that away from him. And this car, this Shelby Cobra, which did what couldn't be done at the time, or which hadn't been done, which was take this beautifully poised and balanced British roadster idea and give it the raw, vicious V8 power of an American car. It was a product of its time that could never be duplicated today. I mean, this is when cars were much more bespoke and handcrafted and, every piece sort of properly fitted. There was no such thing as tire pressure sensors or airbags or, all the crap you have to have today that the government decrees. This was a beautiful moment in time when this car could be made and enjoyed by people in such a way that it made them feel alive. I mean, the sound, the intimacy with your surroundings, because you're basically hanging out of the thing, British Roadster style, no real top, just a vinyl and fabric thing that would go on and kind of protect you from the rain. It was an amazing, amazing time in automotive and probably world history as well, but very, very special. And of course, that's why these cars are so incredibly well valued today. To get an original Cobra, you own a true piece of automotive history, and you will definitely pay up for it, up into the 7, maybe even the 8 figures at some point. So it's a pretty big deal. Anyway, look, I'm going to pause there for a minute, and then we're going to jump into this specific car and take it for a ride. So bear with me one moment. All right, so let's have a quick look around this thing, and just how absolutely radical it is. And this 3rd gen, the Mark III, that this car is a copy of, you can just see how dramatic it became. I mean, the first ones, if you look at the AC Ace, they're much more slab-sided. This thing has enormously flared fenders, meant to accommodate bigger wheels and tires. It has a huge hood scoop to bring air to that big V8. Also an enormous radiator opening, bigger than the earlier ones, again, to accommodate, more air to cool that big engine. The side pipes are incredible, although you have to be very careful of them or you end up giving yourself 9th degree burns. Very common thing. You take your date out for a drive in one of these things, she's not really cognizant of them. She rests her ankle on one and the screams will destroy your eardrums. I've known a lot of people who ended up with some pretty serious burns. The rims are Hillebrand. Very, very cool rim. Big following, early start in American hot rodding. The first magnesium wheels to be used at Indy and, at Bonneville and all that sort of thing. And of course, they work extremely well in the Cobras. The first Cobras were red, white, or black. That was it. That was all you could get. And then a few years later, Guardsman Blue became an option. And that color, this one with the white stripes, really became the definitive Cobra color and remains so today. People who think Cobra end up thinking of this color probably more than any. Love the little taillights. They were obviously sourced from Lucas at the time, or, back then, even into the modern era, these little car companies, especially in England, they couldn't develop all their own stuff. So, they used the Jaguar rear end. They'd use Lucas taillights and electronics from other cars, the MGB gearbox. That all happens today in a way that's ultimately soulless. You know, I mean, you end up with a McLaren and a Ferrari and a Corvette that are using all of the same electronics, and it's different from when they used a Beetle steering wheel and an MGB gearbox for this car in the 60s. It's just, you know, much cooler then. The way those tires and wheels tuck underneath, the chrome roll bar, you know, at the back to, you know, keep a driver purportedly safe. No door handles. You can see all the snaps around it for the, you know, little fabric hood it could have, or the tonneau cover. Little bullet mirror. There's the 427 Ford Cobra badge on the side. Extremely cool with some air vents. The round headlamps up front. You know, it's sexual and sensual and muscular and evil all at the same time. And it's truly one of the most beautiful designs, I think, in, you know, roadster history, made better by Carroll Shelby and his V8. And there were wide variation. As you know, the AC ended up selling some in Europe that were, you know, designed to compete with the European cars. There were drag racing versions called the Dragon Snake. There were rare autocross versions for guys who were really into that, and competition versions, street versions, 280. You know, there were quite a few different variants, although none of them produced in any kind of vast numbers. But all in all, the car is just absolutely stunning. Love the little bumperettes up front and the way the thing looks. And, you know, you look at the little chrome windshield on it, that could be a driver's side hump windshield only on some of the earlier racing cars. It is just you in the elements with sound, speed, and fury. And again, that's what makes the cars of this era and these racing cars so special. Love the racing style gas cap. This is a factory 5 Cobra, which has a little place in my heart because I actually sold a Porsche Cayman years ago when I worked at Autohaus to one of the two brothers who started it. And they, you know, the Cobra kits were already a big thing and they were out there, but Factory 5 made them in such a way that they had a high quality build. They were easy to put together if you used a donor car like a pre-95 Mustang. And, you know, even a guy with limited mechanical skills, just a little bit of a shade tree mechanic, could put one of these things together in his garage. It would go together pretty well and be fun to drive. And they made quite a career out of it, those two brothers. Moved on to different kinds of cars. They make supercars, other things, but the Cobra kit is where it started. A friend of mine built and ordered one right from the get-go. Ended up putting it together, and he just absolutely loves it. And, you know, driving this one, I can also see why. You know, it's one of those cars like the Speedster that uses the Beetle frame, or it's very true to the original. I mean, this has a 302, which in fact will open up, a 302 small block from a pre-95 Ford Mustang. And it's basically the same block as the 289 that originally went into the Cobras. Yeah, you open it up, it doesn't quite look correct under the hood, but it's fuel injected, it runs great, it's easy to drive, and it puts out as much or more power than the original 289s did while having the same balance. It also uses a tube frame like the original Cobras, and it transplants the coil spring suspension from the Mustang. You could put an independent rear end from the Super Coupes. I think this has the solid rear axle, or, you know, sprung from the Mustang. But you know, again, they drive and feel much like the original Cobras do, and that's one of the great points to having success as a kit car, is making it feel very, very true to the original. Again, if you saw that movie, you remember Christian Bale pounding the shit out of the trunk to make the luggage fit, but there it is. I put all the stuff in the back. There's the battery, which is back there for weight. There's where the roll bar bolts to, and you can see it actually had a fairly decent-sized trunk, so if it was you and a good-looking seat cover on a weekend trip, no problem at all. You stuff her in the passenger seat, stuff your crap in the trunk, and off you go. And Yeah, what a beautiful, beautiful way to take a road trip somewhere. So I tell you what, I'm going to put my stuff in the back, and then we're going to hop in and go for a spin. So bear with me one moment. All right, so getting in and out of this thing is a little bit of an adventure. Obviously, no door handle, so you have to reach in here to this little latch, pull it up, and this little door opens. Now, the true Shelby Cobras are aluminum. The first ones were, formed by an English wheel. Find a guy to do that today. Most of the kits are all fiberglass now because obviously it's a lot easier to work with. There was one company who was building aluminum bodies in an old MiG factory in Poland and then South Africa. I'm not sure if that's all still going on. But that was kind of neat, but they were shockingly expensive. The fiberglass ones, like this Factory 5, again, are pretty affordable. And the stuff that they give you is pretty good. I mean, just using the parts supplied by them, you can build a pretty accurate replica that gives you just about everything in terms of feeling that the original Cobras did. And yeah, that's what's neat. You get these little bucket seats with these giant Simpson harnesses, which are miserable to try and use, but there's no proper seat belts. You can see the angle of the shifter there, way forward. Part of that is because the car is so short and the transmission and engine are so long, they actually had to bring the shifter up to be able to be accessible to the driver. So you get this very angled shifter in it. Let me get in there. Do not ever use the windshield, by the way, as leverage to get in and out of these things, or you end up cracking it in no time. Just not made for it. Alright, so you have this very simple instrument cluster loaded with gauges. These are Autometer. The original Cobras would have had Smiths. There's some interesting legacy about the reverse. The speedometer in the first Cobras was reversed, so 0 was... actually, this one is reversed as well, so it was made for that, to match the original Cobra, which is neat. They say, oh, it's good for racing. It differentiated it from the TAC, which sweeps clockwise. But, racing cars really didn't have speedometers. So some guy I read on the internet dedicated himself to trying to figure out why it was like that. And it turned out it was a cost-cutting measure from Shelby, who was kind of famous for it. They found out that the speedo cable coming off the tranny, the transmission was going in an anti-clockwise direction, and they would have had to use some little conversion box on the back of the Speedo to make it swing the right way. That would have cost money, so he said, the hell with it, just sweep it the other way. And that became one of the legends of Cobra. See all the little LED lights and indecipherable switches. Unless you built the car, you really don't know what those are. But anyway, back here we've got a battery cut off. Let me turn that on. So now we got juice. I got an e-brake over here, which is engaged, so I can take it out of gear. Let's fire this thing up. Man, and there you hear that, 302 small block going through the big side pipes. That is the American part of this car that is completely alien in Europe, and now we're in this roadster with no side windows, no door handles, little tiny windshield, out in the open air, hearing the sights and sounds. And that's the European part of this car that's in no way American. And that's really just what makes this thing so unique and cool. You see the little hood handles there when you're looking at the vista of the windscreen, the big hood scoop, the bulbous fenders, the rear view mirror set on the dash, probably cheaper than bolting it to a windshield, if you even had a windshield. The racing ones wouldn't. You got your oil, your water, your oil pressure, that's oil temp. I noticed the fuel and volts aren't working right now, so, well, hopefully they're not, because otherwise we're in trouble. But, those gauges there, you got your TAC over here, you got your Speedo here, you got your lights. A lot of the shit all came out of the Mustang. It uses the harness from a Mustang. It appears to have air conditioning, which I haven't screwed with at all, because I just absolutely don't see the point. This is your horn, I believe. Nice. This is your high beam switch, and these are your turn signals. And again, all using the Mustang harness, which is pretty cool stuff. Alright, let's do it. And of course, this is the best part. And even being a kit, there is no question in my mind that you are getting a very similar experience to the original Cobra. I mean, you've got no power steering, you got what feel like pretty crappy brakes, but they're good enough, and you know, this incredible sound coming out the side pipes next to you, and of course raw American power under the hood. Is more fun than the law allows. It really is. And I mean, you can instantly see what people saw in this car. Way different from a Corvette, way different from any other American sports car at the time, way different from the refinement of an E-Type or any other British sports car of the time. The Ferraris, you know, with their complicated engines and, you know, bigger bodywork, they did not have the sheer anger and simplicity of this Cobra. And, you know, the name is just absolutely perfect. You know, the ride is a little bit bumpy, but again, it's all Mustang, so it doesn't ride too bad. You know, and it's reliable. Being a kid, you got fuel injection, you got, you know, a modern transmission, purportedly modern braking, and yet at the same time, you got these great side pipes, that big V8 noise coming out under the hood, posi traction rear, and if you want to go do donuts in the Walmart parking lot, this car will cheerfully accommodate. Go out here in a minute. I'm not going to talk too much because it's probably loud as hell, and I doubt anyone can hear what I'm saying. So there you go. Sight, sound, and fury. You got the wind in your hair all around you. You're just out at the elements, having an incredibly good time. And of course, that's why these replicas are so successful, because they so faithfully recreate the absolute joys of what was driving an original. And I would argue the same is true of the Speedster in a different way. So anyway, there it is. Look, I'm not going to keep trying to overtalk the sound of this thing. This car was very, very nicely supplied to me by Autohaus of Naples. If you have an interest, give them a call, 239-263-8500, on the web at autohausnaples.com. This is a factory 5 replica of probably a 65 Mark III Cobra, and it is a blast. So thank you very much for having a look. Really appreciate it. We will see you in the next one. And I am going to go enjoy the hell out of myself just getting to the house.